F9, The Fast Saga, is apparently the title of the 9th Fast and Furious movie. It's in all the trailers, it's on this logo, it's on the poster, it's on IMDb listed as that, but then I've seen some other sites just call it F9 and not even include The Fast Saga. So what is the title? Is it F9 The Fast Saga, or is The Fast Saga just there in the marketing to show that this is part of the main Fast and Furious movies and not like a spin-off like Hobbs and Shaw? What is it? I'm just gonna call it The Fast Saga, fuck it. And this movie is about Dominic Toretto and Letty, once again played by Vin Diesel and Michelle Rodriguez, trying to live a quiet life, trying to raise their son Brian, who Vin Diesel saved in the end of Fate of the Furious. And they're pretty successful at doing that until one day the fam just drives up and drops a sci-fi plot in their laps, and of course they gotta go look into it, and they find out very quickly that one of the people involved in this plot is John Cena playing Jacob Toretto, who is Dominic's long-lost brother who he does not regard at all because of some past traumatic history. I was really excited for this movie. I watched all of the Fast and Furious movies in preparation for it this week. I did the same thing for Hobbs and Shaw, but I figured, you know, it's been 2 years, let's get re-caught up with the lore and rewatch Hobbs and Shaw 2 while I was at it. And my opinions have kind of stayed the same, first 4, blah, but then, you know, 5 onwards, including Hobbs and Shaw, have been pretty entertaining. Fate of the Furious dipped more so when I rewatched it. Like originally I had it like at a B, and now it's kind of C+, but it's still pretty entertaining, all things considered. So 5 onward have been the pretty entertaining ones, and having Justin Lin come back in the director's chair this time around gave me a lot of hope, because he directed 5 and 6, some of the best ones, and movies that he directed really well. I don't mean to diss F. Gary Gray or even David Leitch, the directors of Hobbs and Shaw and then Fate of the Furious, but Fate of the Furious felt like it was lacking something, like a kind of energy, a kind of oomph in some instances. Some of that could be attributed to the feuding that was going on set, I think mostly between Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson and potentially some other cast members. And then Hobbs and Shaw, there's some pretty intense fight scenes in that from David Leitch. He knows how to, you know, he knows how to film and stage a good fight scene. It's just that there is still that kind of lack of some other, like, push you over the edge as far as like intensity goes, and I think Justin Lin and even James Wan, who did Furious 7, were able to capture that perfectly in those movies. So I was really excited to see Justin Lin come back. I've been excited for this movie for over a year, ever since that first trailer came out during the 2020 Super Bowl times, where, you know, they were pushing this sci-fi plot even more so. I was really excited to see what they did with that, and, you know, growing the lore and doing all this crazy shit in the action scenes. When the trailer came to a close with Dominic Toretto driving his fucking car into a rope bridge that has collapsed, but anchoring it by having like this little stick stick in his tire so he could swing off a cliff to another cliff, even though he has no idea if there's a platform there for him to get to. It was amazing. I laughed my ass off, and I was incredibly excited to see it. I feel like for the longest time now, Fast and the Furious has been pushing the envelope, not just as far as like going further into the spy genre, because I believe Fast 5 is more of like a bank heist movie. 6 onward have been like the start of the spy movies and growing on from there. So not only have they been pushing it as far as the genre they're in, but also by pushing the amount of insane action that they can have in it. It's pretty much what defines this franchise, where Mission Impossible is a franchise that defines itself by having intense action scenes that feel practical, because Tom Cruise is doing a lot of his own stunts and really putting you in a nail-biting kind of suspense feel. The Fast and Furious movies are kind of the opposite, where they push the envelope but more into absurdity, but still having you be entertained with it. Going into this movie, I saw like some early reaction, kind of like no depth kind of reviews and tweets just saying like, it's a little too ridiculous this time, I can't get into it anymore, it's run out of fuel, wink wink, that's a pun for cars, for a car franchise. And I was like, you know, I feel like for the longest time they have been pushing it. This franchise has not had any doubts about what it wants to be after a while. Like even Fast 5, even though that's like the most grounded one of these absurd ones, it literally, the third act is them dragging a fucking steel bank vault through the streets with just 2 cars dragging it. Like, it's not possible. If I wanted to just say, these movies are all bad because a lot of the stuff they do is impossible, even though the makers of this movie know very well that that's what they're doing, you know, I could do that, but I just feel like there's not a lot of substance to that, and there's just not a lot of, like, it's not really an interesting critique to just say, this stuff is crazy, it's too crazy in fact, and just kind of end it at that and act like the franchise has now been essentially ruined because they pushed it too far. That's not really my stance on this. I'm not trying to go after anyone or say anyone's opinion is wrong if they didn't like it because of the absurdity. I'm just saying that and adding nothing else to the conversation is a little weak for me. That being said, I actually have thoughts about this movie. I actually walked out pretty conflicted, and it has nothing to do with anything I just said about the absurdity. It mostly has to do with narrative. We'll get to it though. Let me at least blaze through the stuff that I did like, because there's a lot of stuff that I do enjoy about this movie that I've come to expect from a Fast and the Furious movie. First of all, that oomph that I was talking about earlier is back. Justin Lin crafts some really fantastic action sequences. I'm constantly in awe at the people that come up with this stuff, because they have to create these action sequences that are so fun, but also kind of original in the sense that we have to find ways to keep it going in this unique setting, depending on what kind of action scene it is, whether it's a car chase or like a fist fight kind of sequence. I was really entertained by a lot of the stuff going on here. I laughed a lot at a lot of the absurdist stuff, and yes, there's impossible stuff in this movie. It's not a big issue for me. But not only were the action scenes just like well helmed and just well made from Justin Lin, but also the cast even felt a little more re-energized ever since Fate of the Furious. Fate of the Furious, you know, as much as it's just like a fine turn your brain off kind of just enjoy it movie, it definitely feels like one of the lesser ones, because the cast, you can kind of get that sense of like, it feels like maybe some of them are trying to phone it in and some of them are more into it than others. But in this one, it felt like everyone was kind of like ready for it, you know? Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris were hilarious in this movie. This movie's got great humor once again, and I thought those two in particular had really great chemistry, especially for one thing that happens in this movie that I won't spoil in case you don't know. But they were the perfect choice to lead this kind of segment of the movie. That's all I'll say, that they're perfect together. There's like a really funny thing where Tyrese and Ludacris are kind of debating how lucky they actually are, like going over some of the stuff that's happened in this franchise. Like, are they fucking like invincible or something like that? I really enjoyed that. I thought that was really funny. So they did a couple things better than the Fate of the Furious, which is good. For instance, one of my issues with Fate of the Furious was that Natalie Emmanuel, who was kind of an important part of Furious 7, is in Fate of the Furious, but she's just kind of there. You know, she wasn't really well incorporated into the group as much as she probably should have been, because, you know, we know everybody else. We've gotten to know them for a long period of time, but her, it's like, you know, she's coming off of Furious 7 where she's a new member, and right now she has kind of nothing to do. I'm not going to act like they gave her like an amazing character arc, or that a lot of these characters have great like personal stories, because one of the things you can talk about with these movies is that the focus is heavily on Dominic Toretto. It really has been like, if the focus isn't on Dominic Toretto, then we're mostly focusing on like Paul Walker. But after Furious 7, you know, we focused a lot more on Dwayne Johnson's character. Everyone else kind of falls by the wayside, and that's one thing about this franchise, just overall, that I wish they did maybe a little bit better of giving the other characters a bit more personal growth, a bit more arcs themselves. But I think they're better utilized as supporting roles in this one, especially Natalie Emmanuel, who at one point has an action scene that she helms herself, where we learn she doesn't know how to drive, like, at all, so she has to learn how to drive in this specific instance because she's the only one who can, but she has to learn how to drive and then learn how to drive like everyone else, fast and furiously, while also getting used to this magnet weapon that's in this truck that she's driving. So it was just really fun. She carried it well. She's like adorably funny and just really entertaining to watch. And I thought they staged that action scene really well too. There's a lot of fun to be had with this one. But also going on the other end of that, I really liked how they tried to further develop the story. Vin Diesel, Dominic Toretto, actually has a character arc this time around, which is kind of refreshing because it feels like in the last couple movies, he hasn't really had arcs. He's had main character duties where he's the main character and he does all the cool action shit, but he hasn't really personally grown himself. Like, rewatching them all this week, I've kind of gained this image of Dominic Toretto where I think Vin Diesel thinks that he is Jesus himself. Like, there's just so many moments where he gives himself, like, all of the best, like, insane action stuff. He gives himself a lot of tough guy lines. Like, my favorite example of this is, like, in Furious 7, you know, the people come in and surround Jason Statham. He's got a grenade. And Vin Diesel just, it feels like he stops the scene just so he can walk up and go, like, I'm ready to meet my maker. are you? And Jason Statham is going on a tangent, and he gets to a point where he's like, you ever heard the expression, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? And instead of letting Jason Statham follow it up, or like just being silent, kind of like giving that kind of look like, yeah, I've heard of it, what do you mean? He goes like, I don't have friends, I got family. And it ruins the flow of Jason Statham's line delivery. It's, such a meme. But that's been my view of Dominic Toretto for so long. He's a guy who has no character arcs. He just goes through events and doesn't really change. But in this one, they actually, they go into the backstory of him and Jacob, what split them apart. A certain event that has been mentioned in other Fast and Furious movies is finally shown, and it was actually pretty dramatic how they did it. The movie opens with like a classic Universal Studios logo, which I was not expecting. I thought we were in the wrong theater for a second, and then they show like what looks like they were trying to capture like that 80s kind of grainy film look for the flashback, and they show this event. It's really dramatic, and then it hard cuts to present day Vin Diesel with his kid in a quiet moment. There's no pop song playing, there's no opening street race, no fancy title sequences. It's just like this, they were actually trying something new. I couldn't believe it, but I was honestly very welcome to it because, it really did kind of have me engaged with the story at that point. Narratively, I think these flashbacks really work, and it helps explain certain things about how Vin Diesel really respects family for these street racing people that he's meeting because he has felt a personal betrayal from someone who was actually in his family. So having that this time around, I thought really worked. There's like weirdly, this movie gets artsy at one point in a spot that probably, they probably shouldn't have put it in this exact spot, but you know what? I was totally into it at that point. You know what? I won't spoil it. It's just, you'll know the scene when you see it. It gets oddly artsy, and I was just like, you know what? It may be an odd place to put it in the movie, but you know what? It's going over the certain arc that Vin Diesel is going through right now, the emotions he's feeling. I'm totally into it. Let's fucking go. I really like his kid also, Brian. Like, they had a little sweet interaction. There's some moments of genuine kind of sweetness in this. Even the way they explained Han surviving in Tokyo Drift made sense. I was expecting going in like, okay, how does Han, like, what kind of quick cuts are they going to show Han, like, rolling out of the vehicle really quickly and, like, ducking for cover? But actually they do something different, and I won't spoil it, but it involves another person, and the person that is involved, I was like, okay, you know what? That's all you needed to say? That it kind of makes sense how they're able to cover it up at this point. You know what? I'm into it. And it was really fun to see Han again. Sung Kang does a really great job as this character. Every single actor in this movie I don't think does a bad job at all. Like I said, everyone felt like really re-energized and really wanting to be here. There's only one person in this cast that I didn't really care for. They're legitimately the worst part of the movie. We'll talk about that a little later. I won't spoil who it is, but Vin Diesel hinted that they would be back for a 10th Fast and Furious movie, and we don't need that, fam. The last thing I'll mention as far as positives go is that the villains in this movie I thought were actually pretty cool. There's one guy who's like, he runs the risk of being just the generic kind of bland villain, but I think the actor plays it well enough. They kind of make him a little bit more comedic as opposed to like legitimately like you're supposed to be threatened by this guy. Like they kind of play it up just a little bit. The actor's having fun, and I think he's got some good back and forth with Charlize Theron, who is here very briefly, but she totally owns it. Like I was really impressed with her performance in Fate of the Furious. I think she's a really great villain in that, so I'm glad that even though she doesn't have the biggest role in this one, she still played it with the same amount of seriousness as she did. But also John Cena. John Cena is really great in this role. I think he totally sold it, and even though it's a little funny that Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel got into a feud, so he lost that wrestler turned actor, so he just got another one to be in this movie. But still, like, I really enjoyed John Cena in this movie. Like, I was not really aware of, like, his limitations as an actor because of his past wrestling days. I was just like, you know, this is the character. I'm enjoying his presence. I'm enjoying the story between him and Dom. Now let's segue into some of the cons here, because there is a lot to talk about as far as things that were frustrating, because these are all the things that I really enjoyed about this movie. If I was just grading it as far as like how entertained I was, how much I was fucking dying laughing at a lot of the absurd stuff and a lot of the jokes in this movie, this would be like a high A. But the thing that makes it frustrating is that narratively they make a lot of choices. There's a lot going on in this story, and some of it isn't absolutely perfect. There's only a couple of issues I would say that don't fall under like narrative, and that would be that, you know, for one, there's a couple technical things about it, like that border on nitpick, but like, sometimes you can notice, like, if you're looking closely, like some ADR moments, lips aren't moving from afar, but you hear a line of dialogue coming from their mouth, supposedly. Like certain shots in sequence, it'll cut to another angle and their heads will be like in a different spot. Small stuff like that not everyone will notice, but my main thing is that it seems like when they use these magnet cars later on in the movie, it's like, it seems like when you turn the dial, they just use a dial to like activate it, and it just attracts everything, and there's like certain modes as far as like how severe it gets, but then later on it seems like they can be selective with the stuff that they magnetize. So it was kind of, I don't know, it was kind of like, I wish there was like a better way to explain how you could do that. It maybe just like press different buttons instead of a little dial. So that was like, if you're just looking as far as like the technical aspect of this movie, that might stick out to you. That did kind of take me out of it. The other thing that kind of took me out of this movie was that even though the flashbacks narratively, I think, work, in execution, they kind of come across a little corny because the casting, it's pretty much all casting. There's some young people of characters that we know where I was like, they look pretty pitch perfect as far as the casting goes, and we're not seeing them act, unfortunately, but I bet they could do really good. The two people playing young Dom and young Jacob, though, I don't see it, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's because with Vin Diesel, I've seen him young. We've seen him young in these Fast and Furious movies all the way back in the first one. He's got a specific kind of look, he's got a specific kind of sound, so this guy comes up playing the young him, and it's like, it's not really a good match. I'm glad that they aren't trying to use like CG, to de-age Vin Diesel and John Cena, because sometimes that can be a risk. But it wasn't a very good casting choice because it didn't really match. The voice wasn't right. But he's a better casting choice than the one they got for John Cena, who doesn't even have the same face. And also, even though they're in these flashbacks, maybe late teens, early 20s, something like that, Dominic Toretto is like looking down at the young John Cena. But later on, when they get older, I guess when you're in your early 20s, John Cena gets his growth spurt and finally like matches Vin Diesel's height. So it's like, oh my God, there's like glaringly obvious stuff like that threw me off. And then there's an actor who's got a very distinct look, very distinct voice, who I did not know was going to be in this. So that was kind of a surprise. But he's in the flashbacks. This is like the 80s. And he looks kind of like how he does now. So I was like, okay, like, yeah, sure. But then he shows up in a present day sequence. Only one, but he looks the exact same. But you expect me to believe that the young Dom and young John Cena aged and changed so much, even though this guy stayed the same. So it was like, that threw me off. So pretty much just those are like filmmaking wise issues that I had with it, and the rest are pretty much all kind of narrative. Like, the movie is trying to establish like Michelle Rodriguez as Letty is kind of, there's kind of a conflict as far as like, she kind of misses like the old her, this excitement, and she's kind of being forced to like settle down, and it's kind of hard. There's not enough time to really get into that conflict, even though Letty does go through an arc. She kind of, it's not made memorable because of the way it's kind of introduced, where she just kind of says it, but we don't really see them attempting to settle down and do things differently, because the movie opens after, how I mentioned there was a hard cut to Vin Diesel and his son having a quiet moment. Like a minute later, Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris and Natalie Emmanuel drive up with the plot, essentially. So there's not enough time to really get into this potential conflict. It was a really rushed intro. There's even certain details as the movie goes on that, they kind of quickly gloss over and aren't really mentioned again. Some things that I would really like explained, that they didn't really go over again. Like, there's really one thing that I'm thinking of where I was like, I would like some clarification on what you mean, and they never did. As much as they did a good job with Dom and Jacob's story, Mia is Dom's sister, also Jacob's sister, so that's why they brought Jordana Brewster back, and they have a good introduction scene for her explaining like, hey, I have every right to be here too, he's my brother, and Vin Diesel's like, yeah, cool, whatever. But then she doesn't really have much else to do. Like, she doesn't have an arc herself. There's not really, I don't know, it just felt like she was brought back for a purpose, but then she got wasted somehow. I'm not sure how that happened. It's like, we need her just to grow out the team, and she can be there for an action scene. But like, I don't know, like there needed to be a bit more for that case. Like I think especially, like I don't think it's a nitpick to say that she didn't get a lot of play. I think she totally should have. Mild spoiler warning, but I feel like these people have been featured in the marketing. I feel like some people do know that these guys are back, but in case you don't, mild spoiler warning. 3 people from the Tokyo Drift crew are back in this movie. One of them is of course Lucas Black playing Sean again, and you know, timeline-wise, if you want to think about the timeline, the man looked 30 in Tokyo Drift. And then Furious 7, that scene with him and Dom in Furious 7 is supposedly happening at that time. But in Furious 7, of course, because they shot it later, he looks like he's visibly aged, but he's still in high school. I don't know how many years passed in between 7 and 8 and then 8 and 9, but I'm assuming that F9 doesn't take place too long after Furious 7, like maybe a couple years since Lucas Black has left high school. Now he looks like he's bordering on 50. He's got like one of those like middle-aged beers. I'm not trying to like age shame or anything, obviously not. I'm just saying like if you're gonna focus on that, it's gonna be really laughable. But my biggest issue as far as bringing them back, even though these guys were really fun to watch, and I understand the need to bring them back because of a certain thing near the end of the movie, but it was kind of like they have them doing something that I wanted to see them progress into that. Instead, they just kind of drop it like, yeah, these guys that were in high school like a couple years ago, well, now they're doing this. Like this, like complete out of left field. Like, why are they doing this? I thought they just wanted to drift. What are they doing with this thing that they're doing? And it's like, well, we need it for later in the movie, and we might as well put some familiar characters there. And I was like, I guess, but I would like some kind of storytelling with that. A quick flashback will do anything to explain it. Going back to Han really quick too, there's another character that he's kind of partnered with. Through flashbacks, he explains, of course, through his eyes, how this came to be. And this character that he's now partnered with, you know, she becomes really important for the climax, but she's kind of introduced like midway through the movie, and there's not really enough time to really get to know her or really buy into this relationship that she and Han have. And I just found it like, you know, I'm supposed to care about this character, like she's important to the plot, but I just kind of don't. For Han to be back, I really want to buy into his motivation, his plight, his worries, but unfortunately for that side of it, I was kind of like, you know, I'm totally fine with a lot of the Han story, but then there's this aspect of it that I'm supposed to care about, and I wish I cared a little more. I guess the last thing I'll mention as far as negatives go is that Dominic Toretto gets out of 2 situations that should be probably impossible. You know what I mean? Like, there's one where someone has to save him, but it seems like he's in a spot that is, like, unreachable, considering, like, I can't spoil it, but it's like, no one should be able to, like, just quickly go in and grab him, you know what I mean? But that happens, and it's like, that's impossible. But then there's one other one where he's kind of being taken away by a certain organization, and I won't mention what it is. But I was wondering, like, too, like, okay, how's he going to get out of this? What's going to go down? And it's revealed that some people he knows have infiltrated said organization just to bust him out. And I was like, number one, this is impossible. There's no way that no one knew that this was going on. Like, this can't happen. Like, I'm not just saying, like, it's an insane action, absurd moment. Like, this is just something that can't happen. And then, 2, it has the actor that I mentioned who is really awful. And they're really awful because they're not an actor. Once again, I won't spoil who it is in case you don't know, but every single line they said, I was like, oh God, like this person is supposed to be back for Fast 10, please, no, please, oh my God, like they are terrible in this movie. So yeah, there's a lot that I can talk about. There's a lot to dislike about the way they try to execute the plot, the things they put into it, even some ways that this movie is made. However, it still has a lot of the things that I come to expect to be entertained by in these Fast and Furious movies. So I'm conflicted. I really did have to list out everything, and I did the math and I came to this conclusion. I'm gonna give F9 a C, as much as it does have its fun humor moments, its fun action especially, despite it being, of course, absurd as hell. It's got a good character arc for Dominic Toretto this time. I surprisingly bought into a lot of the story, more than I was expecting. But there's just so many other narrative choices because it's a long movie and there's a lot going on. It's not as tight. You know, some of the other Fast and Furious movies are at least a little tighter, and this one just, it seemed like it had too much going on, and it ran the gambit of being messy, and that's kind of how it ended up being overall. But it's pretty fun. It has its fun moments. So if you're a fan of this series, or if you're just looking for, I don't care about story, I just want to see some cool action, even if it's totally ridiculous, then I think you might have a blast with this movie. But if you're someone who's not already a fan of this franchise, if you think some of the newer Fast and Furious movies are some of the weaker installments, then you might not want to go see this one. I graded this one a little lower than Fate of the Furious, because even though I think this is more of an entertaining romp than Fate of the Furious, it has a little bit more energy, I grade overall. I take everything into consideration when I grade, and I think Fate of the Furious, despite its flaws, is just a wee bit tighter. I noticed that Chris Morgan, the writer for a lot of these movies, wasn't back to write this one. Apparently he was too busy writing Hobbs and Shaw and could not commit to doing this one too, which is totally understandable. But I was wondering, would bringing him back have fixed any of the issues that I mentioned? Someone who's experienced with writing these movies, would he have had a better take on this story than the screenwriters that were actually attached? One of them, I believe, was Justin Lin. Who can say? I don't know, but I wish them the best of luck with Fast 10, which is supposed to be a two-parter, the end of this epic Fast saga. Jesus Christ. But if you've seen F9, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.